we are all children, at least children of someone, someone's daughter, someone's son. Most of us, I assume, have been school children, a subject that I'm inviting you all to grapple with this afternoon in the next 2 hours or so. That is during this roundtable, Asikhulume. It is our 5th series roundtable. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It's under the title Protecting School Children's Rights and Identities, Opportunities and Challenges for Social Cohesion. Good afternoon. My name is Professor Meyiwa. I'm the host of the Asikhulume series and moderating this 5th series under the School Children's Rights and Identities title. We've lined up 3 experts on today's Asikhulume series, whom I'll introduce in a short while. For a developing country like South Africa, we have a high levels of school enrollment and attendance amongst children of school-going age, that is between 7 and 17 years of age. The vast majority, that is 98%, or 11.3 million children, attended some form of education facility according to Statistics South Africa in their 2021 report. But this was reporting on the statistics of 2018. And this was also reverberated by the University of Cape Town's Children's Institute, which focuses on child rights in focus. You're all welcome this afternoon as we deliberate over this matter. This is a small but significant increase if you look at this number, because it actually had been in earlier years, in 2002, which will be about 19 years ago, it was 95%. But it does demonstrate that South Africa, in the southern region of Africa, unlike other countries, we have quite a number of children going to school. However, in another report by Stats South Africa, which they released data last year, which was actually a very concerning data that discusses existing trends on education participation amongst children of 0 to 17 years of age, saying that about 43% of youngsters, that is 0 to 6 years, did not attend school in 2018. This is one of the reasons that we're having this Asikhulume, this roundtable this afternoon, to deliberate, amongst other things, such a low turnout of the early childhood development stage in terms of going to school. It is along these lines, therefore, that Amnesty International has had a call to sign up for human rights, for what they call human rights friendly schools. And amongst other things, this Amnesty International organization that's affiliated with the United Nations is calling for universities like ours and other universities to be looking into setting up centers, research centers, setting up hubs to ensure that the rights of children are looked at, investigated, we report on them at a broad scale. And for that reason, we have indeed brought along colleagues whom you will be meeting shortly, that I will introduce in a short while, who are experts in this area. That expertise will be, I want to believe, reverberating what Amnesty International calls for, that is to have these human rights friendly schools. What does this mean? They want to ask. These are schools that want to commit to implement human rights friendly schools approach. What does that involve? It involves community being intentional about supporting the rights of children. Know that we, during this month of rights, talk about rights, but hardly ever look into the rights of children, even throughout the year, at least in this country. So it is on this basis that we reckoned within the portfolio that I'm actually heading the portfolio for research, innovation, postgraduate studies, and commercialization, wanting to put a focus, a spotlight on the children's rights. As you will have seen, we have 3 panelists who are experts in this area. That is Dr. Basson, Ms. Israelka Patel, and Professor Solomon Mccalla. Let me take you through the profile of the panelists that we have for this afternoon. We will have each one of them presenting their work on children's work, children's rights in particular, and children's existence and well-being. I'll start off with Dr. Basson. Dr. Basson is a research director at the Bureau of Market Research. This is a company that's associated with UNISA. It's on the UNISA soil. She has more than 15 years of youth research experience with specialization in psychosocial issues that impact the well-being of children and young people. Dr. Basson's research focuses on areas that include sexual exploitation and victimization, violence, and substance abuse. Dr. Basson has a PhD in psychology from the University of South Africa and has been heading the Youth Research Unit at the Bureau of Market Research within the university for the last decade, for 10 years. She has spearheaded the biannual National Youth Research Conference that's hosted by UNISA and has led major research projects for national and international stakeholders, including the Film and Publication Board, African Union, UNICEF, ECPAT International, amongst others. Dr. Basson places high value and quality on ethical and actionable research that can support youth development, that shall protect children's rights. She is a speaker, a regular speaker at both national and international gatherings, and often participates in child protection initiatives. And I know that Dr. Basson will be also sharing with us some of the work that's coming up internationally that's related to the conference that she's been hosting for a very long time. She is a specialist researcher in this area with dedicated well-being focus on protecting children and young people's lives. Our second panelist is Israelka Patel. I hope she's joined us. She actually needs, if you follow school children's politics, she needs very little introduction. As an anti-racism and social justice activist, she's an international speaker. She's an author and law student. In 2021, she published a children's book entitled My Coily Crowny Hair, aimed to empower and encourage girls to go and do their Afro hair from an early age. As a vibrant, young, and unapologetic agent of change who advocates for the elimination of racism, she'll take us through much of the work that she's done. But you will recall that Israelka Patel first grabbed the world's attention when she became the symbol of the fight against institutionalized racism at the Pretoria High School. Pretoria is based in South Africa, next to UNISA for girls. She was 13 years at that time, and she led a protest at the Pretoria High School for girls against institutionalized racism in the schools with a particular focus on policies that were anti-girls and anti the children that she was leading as it relates to her policy in particular. This was followed by a lot of protests that went way beyond the expectation of the cohort that she had led, which actually gained her much more recognition, which went into her co-founding in 2016, the Stop Racism at Pretoria Girls High movement. She's also she's actually serving currently as an ambassador to the Charlotte Mccalla Institute, also serving at the Katatra Foundation, Ahmed Katara Foundation since 2017. These are all the people that we know, not only in South Africa, but some of our very important activists who've led the struggles of human rights, including the rights for children. Zuleika's efforts have been recognized by, believe it or not, if you follow social media, Solange knows, who's the sister to, you know who, the Big B, Beyonce. She's also been acknowledged by Professor Angela Davis. Those who are in feminist research will know who she is. Zuleika has been recognized as the BBC's 100 most influential women in the world, and in 2019 she was listed among the 100 most influential African list of the New African. That is just about the work that Zuleika has done. Hoping she's joined us. She will take us through some of the work that she's done internationally, as well as nationally, where she started it. Our last panelist is Professor Solomon Oprah Mccalla, who is actually a Gautenga. She was born in Johannesburg, did his master's in counseling psychology with the Wits University, and child psychology PhD was with the University of the Free State, where she is now based in the Free State. She's employed as a campus director. He's employed as a campus director, Oprah, as a campus director and principal of the Welcome campus at the Central University of Technology. He is an exceptional professor and research associate at the University of Central University of Technology. In 2019, he was rated by the NRF with a C rating. He's an established researcher. He is the co-founder and president, actually the president and founder of the Logo Talks movement, which is a non-profit company aimed at helping youth to turn their life stories into well-being of good, and wherein we look at the human rights being attended to. Prof. Oprah Mccalla is a published author of several works in national and international journals. He is the project leader, listen to this, of Forgiveness Research Team, whose purpose is to conduct community engaged research aimed at people who have to heal, who've been left by absent fathers, whose childhood will have been affected, obviously, by that. He's a published author of 2 books, one published in 2016, another in 2017. One which I actually have to mention Find meaning, stop wondering. It relates to the work that he'll be sharing with us. He is released his third book in 2022. We hope to have that book, 70 Women and One Man, Meetings with Remarkable Women. Thanks, Prof. Mccalla, for all that work that you shall let us know about further. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, wherever we are, because this is school holidays, we had to ensure that we stream on YouTube. We welcome those that are joining us in that fashion. And as you enjoy your holidays, we want you to be also enjoying our speakers, experts in children's work and children's rights. And I will call upon at this juncture Dr. Basson to come on to the podium. Dr. Basson, please.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much, Prof. Meyiwa, for the lovely introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this lovely discussion this afternoon. I'm from the Youth Research Unit, ladies and gentlemen, and we are part of the Bureau of Market Research at the University of South Africa. And I'm partaking in this discussion this afternoon from a youth perspective, from a youth research perspective. And I think first and foremost, it's very important for us to remember that children and young people in our society are vulnerable members of society, and they need special protection and care. To ensure this, the South African government has made several commitments to protect children. We have our special rights for children in Section 28 of the Bill of Rights in the South African Constitution. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, despite all these commitments and promises made, our children are still not protected. Their rights are still violated with detrimental consequences for children and the broader South African society. Children are faced, especially school-going children, are faced with challenges such as poverty, violence, substance abuse, sexual abuse, family problems, and educational difficulties. To further put these challenges into context, I would like to share with you some of the latest research findings collected by the Youth Research Unit of the Bureau of Market Research. Now, for the past 12 years, our unit has done extensive research exploring challenges impacting on the well-being of school-going children, with the intention to provide up-to-date scientific information that can be used for policy development, service delivery, and improving the situation for all children in South Africa. However, ladies and gentlemen, our research findings clearly show that the violation of children's rights are still happening. There's a lack of protection and support services available, especially for children of a school-going age. In a recent study conducted amongst children 13 to 18 years across all 9 provinces in South Africa, we explored 3 of the top psychosocial challenges faced by children. These challenges include online sexual exploitation, substance abuse, and online violence, better known as cyberbullying. Our study confirmed that many South African children are sexually exploited online, ladies and gentlemen. They experience online sexual grooming, exposure to inappropriate content, the manufacturing of child pornographic images, as well as the exploitation or bribing online. Almost half of the participants confirmed that they have seen inappropriate sexual images online, which resulted in them having mixed feelings and deep-seated psychological and behavioral problems. Concerningly, only a small number of these children seek and get support to deal with these issues. Our latest study further explored cyberbullying and confirmed that cyberbullying is prevalent among South African school-going children. Ladies and gentlemen, how many times do we read in the media about young children committing suicide due to incidents of bullying? Our study confirmed that many children experience false statements being made about them, threatening messages online, as well as exclusion, which result in deep-seated psychological problems. They experience mixed feelings of anger, sadness, and frustration, and have to deal with that very often all by themselves. More than a third of these children, ladies and gentlemen, who have been bullied, end up also bullying other children online. And similar to previous YRU at BMR studies, children are less likely to report what happened to them online or to seek assistance to deal with these issues. Our study also explored substance abuse among school-going children. It remains a widespread threat with most likely life-threatening consequences for our young people. Similar to previous studies we've conducted since 2010, we found that alcohol remains the drug most often used by children. Furthermore, children of a school-going age access drugs very easily. And very often, the study confirmed that children use cannabis, or better known as dagga, as well as local concoctions, including substances such as heroin, known as nyope or hunga. Very interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Our research confirms that the high levels of stress is a contributing factor to substance abuse amongst young children in South Africa of a school-going age. Only 3% of these children have tried to get support to deal with issues of substance abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just sharing with you an brief overview of some of the latest research findings that we have found at the Youth Research Unit of the Bureau of Market Research. And it's clear that the rights of children to protection from exploitation and abuse are neglected. Their right to adequate protection, social services, and efficient healthcare are violated. All sectors of society, ladies and gentlemen, need to reflect and introspect on what is being done and what is not being done to protect children. It is our shared responsibility as parents, families, communities, and the government to ensure that all our children are protected and growing up in a conducive environment. Despite these challenges faced by young people, such as cyberbullying, online sexual exploitation, and substance abuse, there are several opportunities for us to strengthen children's rights and promote social cohesion within the South African society. This can be done by working together, ladies and gentlemen, and strengthening the child rights system. Also promoting effective participation of children, give children an opportunity to voice their opinions and share their experience so that we can learn from them and improve the situation for them in South Africa. Furthermore, we can also facilitate and support children's rights education amongst different communities and community members in South Africa. Very important, ladies and gentlemen. We need more research, further research on the issues impacting on South African children and the application thereof of these findings to raise awareness and influence policy development as well as appropriate intervention programs for South African children. We also need to increase multi-sectoral support for children, especially school-going children, ladies and gentlemen. High levels of collaboration and social cohesion can positively contribute to the advancements of children's rights in South Africa and the protection of children. We require immediate action. Let us prioritize child protection in South Africa because every child matters. I would like to end off my opening statement today just to touch on what Prof. Meyiwa also said, that we will be hosting as part of Action this year our African conference that specifically will deal with online sexual exploitation of children, and be inviting stakeholders across the African continent to invite us for this wonderful conference that will be happening in September. And I have more information available about that. You are welcome to contact me if you would like to learn more about this conference. I thank you. Thank you, Prof. Meyiwa.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Basson, for that. Wow, that's really mind-boggling. It just leaves us feeling quite irresponsible as adults. You know, what you've taken us through is very worrying. We will get the panel to engage with that, as well as I invite people who've come through who were not earlier in this conversation. We will have the three panelists, one after another, and then we'll get them to engage with each other as I moderate that. But the topic again is looking at protecting children's rights. What opportunities and challenges do we have, and how is the social cohesion getting affected in all of this? I mean, all of us, as we've been children or have children or connected to children, we have that responsibility. I hear that Zuleika is in the boardroom now. Zuleika, you've joined the panel. Thank you for coming through. I'm sorry you backled late earlier on. But what I did earlier was to introduce you, and I'm just thinking I may have to do this again, just as a form of acknowledging the work that you've done, being so young, as still a student, a university student, with all the activism that you have and how you're putting the country across the world. It's very, very appreciated. We know all your work, the co-founded companies, more movements rather, that you actually have spearheaded, including the work that you're doing that's recognized by people who actually one will not expect to recognize your work, from the celebrities to established, world-renowned feminist researchers to a number of organizations that have recognized you. And for that, we thank you for coming through. I introduced you earlier, dating back to the work that you did just as a teenager at 13 years with the Cole, with the girls, Pretoria High School, and all of that has actually been recognized. At this time, I want to also say hello to everybody across the social media who are joining us. Enjoy the quite worrying but equally responsibility that we need to be taking on in protecting the children's rights better than we are right now, as a country, as the continent, and as the world. Zuleika, you can now come. If you could put your video on.
I think we just lost him, Prof.
Oh my goodness. We seem to have lost Zuleika again. We will come back to her. I suggest that we get Prof. Mccalla to come through, if that's fine with you, Oprah. At this time, we'll actually have Zuleika last. Prof. Mccalla, to colleagues who were not here earlier on, is a counseling psychologist, a registered psychologist. He's a counselor and is affiliated with the Central University of Technology as a campus director and principal of the Welcome campus. But not just that administrative huge position. His work is extensive on matters related to children at school level as well as beyond. I'll request Prof. Mccalla to come through. Thank you that you have now shown your video. Over to you, please, Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof. Good afternoon to the audience. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you and your team for inviting me to be part of this panel. And of course, the broad theme is protecting school children's rights and identities. And today I am specifically going to zoom into just one aspect, which is upholding social cohesion by implementing meaningful, positive learner discipline. As we all know, when you look at issues of children's rights, there is so much involved into it. And one of the topics that is extremely important, especially in schools, but not only in schools, but also in home environments, is the whole issue of discipline. And I'm going to also be sharing with you briefly about a research which we conducted in this particular area, just to look at some of the challenges that are experienced, especially in the issue of positive discipline, vis-a-vis corporal punishment. And as I begin, I just want to indicate that challenges related to learner discipline are not only a matter of concern in South Africa, but they are a global problem. And we know that as South Africans, we attained independence in 1994. And as a result, we ushered in a democratic constitution in 1996, which emphasized on human rights and thus abolished corporal punishment in schools. Ladies and gentlemen, the banning of corporal punishment paved a way for the introduction of alternative means of learner discipline, of which positive discipline was a chief approach meant to safeguard learner dignity and protection of learner rights. And as a result, positive discipline focuses on discipline as opposed to punishment and thrives for correction, promotion of responsibility, and self-discipline without undermining the dignity of learners. And cases of truancy, like a late arrival in schools, cultism, drug abuse, insulting, assaulting, stealing, rioting, threatening other learners and school staff members, and many other antisocial vices. Unfortunately, they keep on rising. And this seems to suggest that positive discipline has not been effectively implemented in South African schools. Therefore, there is a need to explore ways in which social cohesion can be used as an instrument for effective implementation of meaningful learner discipline with a view of upholding the rights of learners. And social cohesion involves building shared values and communities of interpretation, and thus reduce disparities about people's understanding of issues of mutual concern. And in terms of our problem statement, I would like to begin by indicating that it is imperative that we should introduce positive discipline with the aim of adopting a non-violent and holistic method to managing learner discipline in schools and life in general. And therefore, positive discipline seeks to protect children's rights without enforcing a discipline regime that does not tolerate any means of the use of violence as a means of instilling learner discipline. And the current state of indiscipline in schools demonstrates the ineffective manner in which positive discipline was implemented. An overemphasis on children's rights alone without corresponding responsibilities and effective engagement of all stakeholders in a socially cohesive manner is to blame for the negative results which are associated with positive discipline. The implementation process of positive discipline is characterized by lack of teacher understanding on what positive disciplines approaches are, and the absence of joint efforts from school authorities and parents in working together towards a mutually shared consensus on meaningful learner discipline approach. And therefore, a study which we conducted sought to establish participants' view on the most effective framework for effective implementation of positive learner discipline, which embodies the protection of children's rights and identities. And in terms of our research objectives, in seeking to establish the educator's perception on a framework for implementing positive learner discipline, our study pursued the following objectives, and they are three. Number one, to identify the participants' understanding of positive discipline concept, to see how they interpret this particular concept, because that will determine how they apply it. To establish the participants' perception of the manner in which positive discipline was implemented, and last but not least, to find out the participants' views on how positive discipline could be implemented. And in terms of our theoretical framework, our study was guided by a combination of Adler's theory of individual psychology and the Ubuntu African philosophy. First and foremost, I need to start by mentioning that in his theory, Alfred Adler presents two tenets of Adlerian psychology, whose arguments largely mark the origin of positive psychology. And the first one is that our thoughts on striving for perfection and superiority. And the second one is establishing a sense of community feeling or social interest. The first one, striving for perfection, relates well to issues of learner dignity, while the second one, community feeling or social interest, fits perfectly well with social cohesion. And as we took this theoretical framework further, we included the Ubuntu philosophy, and Ubuntu philosophy further illuminates social cohesion within the African context and assists in constructing a socially relevant framework for implementing meaningful positive discipline that upholds children's rights. And for our research approach, it was a qualitative approach, and we saw six selected schools in 2 districts in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa. And for this particular study, our population comprised of secondary schools in the Mpumalanga province, as I indicated earlier, and we selected our sample from 2 districts. And this sample comprised of school principals, chairpersons of school governing bodies, and they were actually representing parents. We also had class educators, and we also included life orientation skills educators. And therefore, in total, we visited 6 public schools, and from these 6 public schools, we had 24 participants in general. And for data collection, we used semi-structured interviews, and we also thought it best that we also need to look at document analysis, to look at what is entailed in the documents and what is the educators or principals or the SGB's interpretation of what was entailed in the documents. And in terms of the first finding looked at the definition of positive discipline. And we discovered, interestingly, that when defining positive discipline, participants demonstrated varying levels of understanding, and their levels of understanding varied from ignorance to adequate. And interestingly enough, one participant expressed a total ignorance of the concept, indicating that it was for the first time that they come across this particular term. And therefore, if they come across it for the first time, what you don't know does not exist. And therefore, this poses a concern in terms of how are they implementing positive discipline in their schools. And others provided definitions close to being correct. However, they fell short of certain imperatives that provide a clear-cut separation of positive discipline from alternative disciplinary measures that are punitive. And this viewed positive discipline as an approach that incorporates more humane strategies in molding learner behavior as opposed to corporal punishment. And others demonstrated an impressive understanding of positive discipline by stating that it is a means of disciplining learners in a way he or she will not feel ashamed, bearing in mind and respecting the rights and dignity of learners. And focusing on still on the definitions of positive discipline, it is very interesting, and we were also quite concerned that if principals are not able to define the concept of positive discipline, this in itself will pose a challenge, because positive discipline is defined in literature as as a teaching and parenting model that strikes a balance between 2 main considerations, and namely effective teaching and respecting the rights of learners. And therefore, positive discipline is also viewed as a management technique for making children responsible individuals who can solve their problems. It capacitates them to think well of themselves while they learn the rules of society. And therefore, positive discipline discusses the use of violence as a teaching tool. The teacher plays a mentorship and guidance role without the use of fear to enforce good behavior. And positive discipline is enshrined in human rights, and it encourages mutual respect between the teachers and the learners, the preservation of good relationship, emphasis on participation and cooperation, and safeguarding of learners' self-esteem, which is extremely important. And interestingly, we discovered that none of the participants could mention a single principle that guides positive discipline. And this demonstrates the existence of a huge knowledge gap in educators regarding the concept of positive discipline. And when focusing on the second finding, we discovered challenges in the implementation of positive discipline, and participants revealed that the implementation of positive discipline was characterized by a top-down approach that lacked stakeholder consultation, and some indicated that the districts just came to the schools and enforced this method upon them without proper understanding, and some indicated that they don't know how they need to implement positive discipline. And they also made mention of a concern that it was a copy and paste approach that imported Western ideas and implemented it without modifying it to reflect local context and cultural values of South Africans or of Africans. And one of the other issues that came up was lack of training or of stakeholders on positive discipline strategies and techniques. And they also indicated that there was too much emphasis on children's rights while neglecting responsibilities attached to these rights and rendering the rights of teachers less important. And therefore, in this way, we realize that there seems to be a misunderstanding in terms of how do we bring a balance, or how do the teachers bring a balance between the rights of the learners and their own rights. And if teachers do not understand or know how they need to educate learners about their rights without, of course, allowing them to take advantage of their own rights, that becomes a major concern, because it is expected that as leaders and as mentors, they should be able to understand that there is a clear balance between children's rights and the rights of adults, or the rights of educators. And the third and final finding from our study was to suggest an effective implementation framework. And our proposed framework for positive discipline was to adopt a multi-stakeholder Afrocentric positive discipline approach. And for this purpose, hence, we coined the phrase meaningful positive discipline. And it blends positive discipline with the theoretical underpinnings of the Ubuntu philosophy. Because if we were to look from the perspective of Ubuntu philosophy, we have to understand that in Ubuntu philosophy, we emphasize that we are, or I am because we are. So within the Ubuntu philosophy, it encourages a situation where we look at issues from a holistic perspective. We already live in environments that are full of violence, and we do not want to instill violence within our children from a very early age, and seem to want to formalize it by saying this is the correct way in which we need the correct manner to correct our children whenever they find themselves, on their own. We need to come up with ways in which we can instill positive disciplines that will uphold the rights and the dignity of learners. Because from the apartheid era, some of us who were exposed to corporal punishment do know that unfortunately it did more harm than good. If you look at all the learners who dropped out of school, if you look at all the psychological scars that learners suffered as a result of corporal punishment, that in itself is an indication that violence cannot be used as a corrective measure. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we suggested a framework that comprises a socially cohesive approach that begins focuses on stakeholder engagement and tailor-making of a positive discipline approach that will be appealing to local cultural contexts, and which will also be able to review school guidelines. And then we also thought it is also important that this positive discipline approach should also be part of the handbooks which are provided to both the educators and the learners. And then what is also extremely important is the training of stakeholders, because once you introduce a method and you don't take the stakeholders through training, that in itself becomes a problem in terms of implementation. And what is also important is the harmonization of the home and school disciplinary practices. If the school practices one method and the home environment practices another method, that in itself brings a disjuncture between the two. And hence there is a great need that parents should also be brought on board. But also of more importance is the establishment of vibrant learner representative councils, wherein the ILRCs themselves are also capacitated and taught and learned on ways in which schools need to implement meaningful positive discipline. And last and not least is the infusion of the meaningful positive discipline into the school curriculum. And by so doing, we will be upholding the rights and dignity of learners. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for taking us through that, Prof. Mccalla, looking at, variant forms of instilling positive discipline. We now have in the room, we're very fortunate that Zuleika has been able to connect. We will have Zuleika, we're not going to introduce you for the third time, sorry about your inability to come through. So please put on your video, and if you could come through. I had introduced you to this Teams audience, but also we have audience on Facebook as well as on YouTube that's connecting. This being, of course, the school holiday season throughout the country. We are confident that the school children are also part of these conversations as they happen at home. Over to you, Zuleika.
Good afternoon, Prof. Thank you for the introduction. Afternoon to everyone that's currently joined in the discussion. I am Asikhulume Patel, and around this topic, I'm going to focus my views on the importance of protecting children's rights and identities, and what that has to do with building inclusive and anti-discrimination environments. And then I'm going to also focus on the challenges for social cohesion, which reflect the state of our nation's social cohesion, right? And so protecting children's rights in a schooling environment, the most important thing is building inclusive environments, and inclusive environments touch on environments that are anti-discrimination, environments where children's identities are protected and children's identities are not discriminated against, and children are protected from all forms of discrimination, such as racism, building environments in schools which are anti-racist, and empowering schools to become spaces whereby anti-racism is empowered, and building environments that are anti-queerphobic, environments that are anti-xenophobic, and environments that are gender discrimination, right? And building these kind of environments involves schools having to structure their policies to be aligned with the values stated in the Constitution, as well as the values of Ubuntu, as well as values that speak on inclusivity, right? And I touch on inclusivity and the importance of the values of inclusivity because in our country, our schooling system has a lot of inequality in it, and many of the schools were built without the idea of inclusivity being a part of the structures that uphold the school and the traditions that uphold the school, right? And the importance of inclusivity would bridge the gap between creating these environments and the environments which we currently have within schools. And ensuring that children's rights are protected is empowering children's rights in a schooling environment, empowering children by asserting them with knowing and understanding their rights, and teaching children on their rights, involving within the curriculum, the schooling curriculum, a part for empowering and asserting children with educating them on their rights, and their rights in situations whereby their rights could be violated. And now the challenges posed for this, the challenges for social cohesion are that in creating these environments, the difficulty that comes with creating these anti-discrimination environments reflect on the challenges which we're having as a nation currently with social cohesion, right? And in order for us to bridge that gap with these challenges, it begins with us empowering social cohesion within our environments, within our societal environments, to ensure that when we begin with empowering social cohesion within schools, we already have societies that understand and practice social cohesion. And to close off my opening statement, I believe that the most important factor in us protecting children's rights and identities is us building environments that are inclusive, environments that have inclusive policies which do not discriminate on any child's identity, and ensuring that schooling environments are anti-discrimination environments. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thanks a lot for that, Zuleika. I'm going to actually request the audiences that we have across the platforms to send through the comments or questions for our panelists. But I want to zoom into, just start off with Zuleika's opening statement. I'm interested in the book that you published last year and its relationship in particular with the 2016, 2014, when we were only 13 years old and you participated in that kind of movement. So from the time that you started, the kind of movement that you started when you were at Pretoria Girls High, to the time that you were a bit mature, still a young person, when last year you published the book that you have. What has been going through your mind in terms of the right of the child in particular? Zuleika?
To answer that question, the relation with the book My Coily Crowny Hair, which I published last year, and the hashtag Stop Racism at Pretoria High School for Girls movement, which I participated in 2016, is the book is actually one of the things which at the time I'd aspired to publish something that would be tangible, a tangible documented form of the messaging which was at the heart of the movement and carried the movement. And the relation which that book has with children's rights and what was going through my mind when I began writing the book was I wanted to bring forth a book which would empower a Black child's existence by affirming them with representation that is positive, and showing them that their identity can be seen within literature, can be seen on the cover of a book. And I also wanted for children to understand, when they read the book, to understand that they have rights, and they have rights to not be discriminated against. And I wanted them to understand this through empowering them with representation, and for them to see themselves reflected within a book and see their identities reflected in a positive manner. And the relationship between the book and the movement is that the book is an extension of that movement, because that movement was a voice against anti-Blackness that exists within many of the country's school policies, within your former white only schools, being basically all the schools that are in the suburbs. And the relationship is that book was an extension of what we were advocating in the movement. And that book basically was aimed at empowering a Black child's existence and making them understand that they have rights to exist proudly with their identity and express themselves proudly so in any space they choose to be in.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I want to go to Dr. Basson. Your extensive scientific data and information that you shared, Zulega, you will have missed that. One of our panelists, you probably will have actually seen from the invitations and the bio, is Dr. Basson, who is a director who's specifically looking at research work and advocating for children's rights. Dr. Basson, from your analysis in terms of the identities that have been explored or violated, you start off by saying the rights of children are violated. In your work and the scientific data that you've presented, or some of which, of course, that you will not have shared with us given the time constraints, how do issues of identity play themselves out, in particular of the children, and in relation to what Israelka has brought to fore this afternoon? Dr. Basson?
Thank you, Prof, and thank you so much for the question. Yes, I think definitely, Prof, our children are faced with several challenges. As I mentioned during my presentation, for the past 12 years, we've been doing extensive research into issues affecting children, and we do not see, unfortunately, any positive change. There's still a long way to go, especially with regard to children having opportunities to express themselves, to really be within a safe educational environment. I'm thinking now specifically of school-going children. So unfortunately, our research clearly shows that the problems persist despite efforts for companies, organizations, governments trying to improve the situation. Unfortunately, the problems do persist. Also, there are new problems faced by children, especially due to technology. We see a rise on online exploitation, online violation of children. So that every time when we engage with children, when we do research, we also clearly see that our children are facing new challenges as they grow up. So I definitely think specifically with regard to identities, with regard to rights, with regard to protection, there's still a lot for us to do. But I think we definitely can do that, Prof. If we work together, there's definitely a lot that we can do. We always look into all the challenges, but I think there's a lot of wonderful opportunities for us as well. And I'm personally always so inspired by the young people because they are so positive and they have a lot of energy. And I think we definitely need to use that as well to create a better environment for all children in South Africa. Thank you, Prof.
Before you get off the stage, Antoinette, I'm interested to know in terms of, would you reckon that the bullying that happens and its connection to some suicide cases that have really rippled the country quite badly are related to the violations to which you make reference, and to which Zuleika has also given us some glimpse of issues, not just only of the sexual harassment to which you've made reference of, but also of identities. I mean, do you see connections in your work amongst all of these kind of things that lead to kids hurting themselves ultimately because of these rights that get violated?
Yes, thank you, Prof. Unfortunately, the bullying you see in our research, Prof, it's definitely remaining a huge problem. And there's a lot of children that are violated at schools, that they really have a problem with threatening messages, really messages touching them as an individual themselves, and that's why we see a lot of cases of suicide. We have personally been invited to schools to come and engage with teachers and young people on these issues because of suicide attempts or children that have been really violated online as well. Prof, we do not really see clear correlations always. However, our data show that it comes across different race groups, different genders, different age groups. It comes across all groups of children. And really, our children are having a tough time to deal with this. And that's why we are also asking that our schools invest in proper support systems for learners that can address these issues and help children to cope with the impact of experiencing cyberbullying as well. Thank you, Prof.
Okay. I now want to go to Prof. Mccalla. You're on the spot now as a counselor here. What could be done, in particular, as it relates to what's been pointed out by Zuleika and Dr. Basson, as it relates to supporting children better? Your work has been, at least the one that you've shared with us, on positive discipline. What could be done for protecting children from a counseling point of view as a psychologist to mitigate these kind of ills that we see? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Prof, it's very important first that we need to understand that we have a responsibility to instill faith or confidence in our children and not fear. And also, it is also very important that we should make our children to feel better about themselves, because the more we instill corporal punishment, at the end of the day, they're going to end up feeling bitter about themselves. And from a counseling perspective, we have also discovered that underneath each and every bully is another bully. The children who are bullying others aggressively, you'll find that they do have issues, and most of the issues are stemming from their home environment. So most of the time we tend to focus so much on the children who are bullied, but we also need to pay special attention to the bullies themselves, because those are also some of the children that require so much help, because they are acting out aggressively some of the issues that are happening in their lives. And as a result, we need to have a multidisciplinary approach. As psychologists, yes, we can see the children in our offices, but the involvement of social workers who are able to visit the children in their homes to find out from their neighborhood what is happening in the life of this particular child, that in itself is extremely important. The use of lay counselors, or even the use of pastors and reverends in the communities, because those are the people who are in contact with these families on a weekly basis. Those are the people who can also provide additional information in terms of what can be done. And therefore, a multidisciplinary approach wherein we involve all stakeholders is extremely important, including involving external family members, because those are the people who can provide information in terms of what is happening. But it is also extremely important that we should not put a label on either child, either the bully or the bullied, because both of them are still children and they are just victims of the circumstances, irrespective of whether they are the victim or the perpetrator. We need to go into the situation with a balanced view to assist all of the children in general. But we need to also create an environment where children can openly talk about their feelings, because you cannot heal or solve what you hide. We need to make sure that our children become vocal about whatever issues that affect them. I am so encouraged by one of our panelists that she became very vocal about issues that affected her. And as a result, that in itself became a way in which all other children, boys and girls, were able to learn from her to say there is a way in which we can approach whatever issues that we confront. And as a result, that is how psychology was started as the talking cure, that we need to be able to open up about our issues. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I mean, what you're saying, your reference to Ubuntu was also made reference to by Zuleika. Now I'm actually moving to you, Zuleika. With what's been said by Prof. Mccalla now, I see the correlation to what you made reference to, the Ubuntu aligned policies. But what does that entail? Although you've shared with us that there ought to be a bridge between the school and the home, but what does that entail in particular for the teachers? I want, as somebody who's recently come out of the school, to say, in your perception, having walked this path, having been such an activist, what do you think should be entailed in this Ubuntu aligned for the teacher in particular? Zuleika?
Thank you. In terms of for the teachers, I believe what is Ubuntu aligned for the teachers, because I think that we can't have a schooling environment that is not well balanced, where rights of the learner are protected and rights of the teacher are also protected, right? I think that we both need to have both. We need to have well balanced environments where teachers as well are protected in their own right, right? So what this entails, Ubuntu aligned policies for teachers. I also think that this goes into the method of teaching, right? The method of teaching, and it goes into discipline as well, ensuring that there's a good understanding of what is positive discipline and what is negative discipline, right? And then in terms of protecting the teacher themselves, I think that also to create these environments, to create socially cohesive environments, I believe that within a lot of public schools, there's still an issue of adequate representation within teachers, right? I believe that there's within your former Model C schools, there's not enough Black teachers being employed. I think that there should then also be equity policies within the schools for teachers as well, and for the and for across the board with their employees within the schooling environment, there should be equity policies. And I also think that what is Ubuntu aligned for teachers should also be policies that, in the case where a teacher finds themselves in a scenario of their rights being violated, there should be policies which protect them from that, and as well as the equity policies which I touched on. And equity in terms of there should be to create socially cohesive environments within your former Model C schools, and schools whereby there's not adequate representation within the number of Black teachers being employed. I think that there should be policies that touch on representation and having representation present. And then within your historically disadvantaged disadvantaged schools, I believe that there should be policies to ensure that a teacher is not being overworked, whereby a teacher is not teaching a class of 90 children and has that responsibility to carry of teaching a class of over 60 children. I believe that teachers should also have proper environments in which they can also work efficiently and work properly within those environments. So I believe that within your historically disadvantaged schools, there should be policies that can ensure that a teacher has a proper environment to teach in, whereby they could only teach a certain number of children to ensure that they're able to attend to each learner appropriately, and also ensure that they have the right resources to carry out teaching efficiently within that classroom environment.
Thank you. Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, I'm actually waiting for comments, some of which I've posed already to our panelists. So I'm looking for more. There's a question for you, Prof. Mccalla. You talk of question is, you talk of harmonization of school and home practices, but at the same time you're talking of the discipline. Why should we be worrying about discipline and the reference to corporal punishment that is already outlawed? What will be your response to that? The latter, corporal punishment, that's already outlawed. Should we really still be talking about that? Prof. Mccalla?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, there should be harmony between the home environment and the school environment, because in the school environment, we are talking about meaningful, positive discipline. But unfortunately, from experience in the home environment, corporal punishment still takes place behind closed doors. And this is also indicated by the kinds of violence that we see from our learners in respective schools, because they are just out there to vent out their anger. And as a result, that is why I made mention of harmonizing the home and the school, so that parents themselves are also taught about the importance of practicing meaningful, positive discipline as opposed to corporal punishment. Unfortunately, we still need to mention corporal punishment because it still takes place behind closed doors. If I were to make one little joke, I remember my 6-year-old daughter, when I tried to discipline her, and I said, okay, I will take away this gadget for X number of days. And she said, why don't you just give me a hiding so that I can get over with it? So it seems like a joke, but unfortunately, and one becomes surprised, how do you know about a hiding? Then you can take it that from friends, from their conversations, there are some indications that in some families, corporal punishment does still take place, and hence a reference to instilling or teaching or educating both environments about the importance of meaningful, positive discipline as opposed to the punitive one. But the other issue that we also found out from our research is that issues such as subjecting learners to certain kinds of works as a means or a way of punishment, that in itself could also infringe on the rights of these particular learners, because it can also harbor on child labor. If you are to say you will be expected to scrub the toilets or do this or work in the garden, because as a way of disciplining you for what you have done, that in itself can pose a challenge. But this therefore requires all of us as a community to sit down and to look at ways in which we can instill discipline that still respects the rights of learners, and also instill a sense of positive identity in them and enables them to become the kinds of individuals who are not glued up on violence, but who are more concerned with ensuring that whatever corrective measures are taken against them are meant for good, but not to destroy the lives of our children.
Thank you. Dr. Basson, this is for you. UNISA is training a significant number of teachers. So what should UNISA be doing differently to better prepare the teachers for the rights of children not to be violated in the manner that we actually have learned from Prof. Mccalla in terms of the discipline, even just the understanding of what discipline is. From that study, that's what we actually got to learn, that there's not even understanding of what positive discipline is about. Although you're not, now that I know that you with the Bureau of Market Research, you're not necessarily UNISA for the College of Education, but in your view, what could UNISA do differently in training teachers to better manage, be prepared in a better fashion to deal with the children in the context of your exposure to the work that you do? Dr. Basson?
Thank you, Prof. No, actually, thank you very much for the question. I feel very strongly about this, Prof, because I've seen this over the years, that also our teachers have a very difficult time to deal with young people at school because the training at tertiary institutions are not always in line with what is actually happening. So in my view, Prof, I definitely think that universities need to also include in the curriculum the psychosocial challenges faced by children and how to deal with that from an education perspective. And I also want to support Prof. Mccalla to say that we need a harmonization between the school and the home of the child. That's extremely important. Very often we see difficulty, parents have difficulty to actually approach children and to deal with children because of the huge generation gap between children and parents, especially due to the development of technology. But I feel strongly, Prof, when it comes to educators, we need to strengthen teachers to also deal with the challenges that young people face, and also empower teachers to be strong and to really engage with children and learn from children. I really feel strongly about child participation as well. And I feel that we can learn so much from young people and from children. And I think that also is very important, that we need to focus on that. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thanks for that. I seem to be running out of comments now or questions from the audience, but can I turn back to you, Zuleika? Tell us more about your work, given your activism, your work with the Charlotte Manya Matlege Foundation Institute, that's what it's called, Charlotte Manya Matlege Institute, as well as the Ahmed Kathra and Sophie de Bruyn work that you actually have done with reference to you having been recognized by all of these kind of big, weak people. Zuleika?
Prof, I'm going to ask you to just come again for me because
Okay.
it was breaking a bit towards the end.
Okay. The question is about your activism, which is out there. It relates to how has been your work with the foundations that you exposed with. That is the Charlotte Manya Matleke Institute and the foundation, as well as the Ahmed Kathra Foundation. So with all of these big wigs that have at least their organizations that are named after them, having recognized you quite publicly, leading to you being awarded with the kind of recognition that you've had. How does that speak to your work specifically?
With that question, Prof,
Wow,
have both been very, very integral in a part of my mission and my vision that I have with my activism, being centered around social justice and also being centered around addressing socio-economic issues within communities and small communities, right? My work with the Charlotte Mccalla Institute has more so been around the empowerment, the education empowerment, and the empowerment with skills within disadvantaged communities like Kliptown being the most underdeveloped community in Johannesburg, and working with young girls in terms of empowering them with the necessary skills and the necessary education around the goals that they may have, and allowing them to address their issues for themselves and empowering them to address their issues within the community for themselves, and helping them pave a way in terms of how to address and effectively change the social issues that they're facing within their communities. And my work with the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation has mostly been around anti-racism and amplifying anti-racism within schools. And a lot of the work that I've done with them, which has been a collaboration between the foundation and myself, has mainly been around educating learners on anti-racism and what anti-racism is, and how to actively partake in anti-racism in terms of eradicating racism within its schooling environments. And that's been largely connected to my mission as a whole as an anti-racism activist.
Thank you. Thanks for that. This is very encouraging for our youth to be active in all that you do. I want to end with Dr. Basson, with the Children's Act possible, or any other, because one will assume that the regulatory framework should really be assisting in improving the well-being and the challenges that are faced by children, and not just, of course, only what teachers for school children, what parents who raise them, and what communities who make a contribution to their well-being could do. But shouldn't we be having a regulatory framework that's better assisting? And having said that, which I'm just thinking of the Children's Act, shouldn't that be assisting quite greatly in dealing with the challenges to which you've made reference?
Thank you, Prof. Yes, that's extremely important. And I think we can compliment South Africa and our country for having a wonderful legislation in place protecting children. We have our Children's Act. We have the Sexual Offences Act protecting our children against sexual exploitation. We have so many wonderful acts, the Film and Publication Boards Act as well. And that's extremely important, Prof. But what we've seen in our research, very often the problem becomes with the implementation of legislation, policies, and procedures that already have been developed. And very often we are complimented on international level for having these wonderful, developed these wonderful instruments, and we have them available. But in practice, they are falling short. They are not always implemented correctly or effectively. And that, unfortunately, cause our children not to always benefit from having these wonderful legislation and policies and procedures in place. So I think there's still a lot of work for us to do, especially what our research is showing. We need much more training of individuals on these instruments. We need much more awareness and knowledge creation around these instruments so people know they exist and how to correctly implement them and use them to the benefit of children and young people. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. We will end it there, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, with all our panelists having pointed out the need to uphold children's rights and identities, which is a right on its own, but having spoken quite vehemently about the need for implementation, the need to be intentional by all that are responsible for children to ensure that we get to raise them in the manner that they actually should be raised, because they are the future leaders, but also ensure that their well-being is taken care of. At this juncture, I'm now going to ask Dr. Ntosana. Dr. Ntosana is the co-presenter, actually hosting this fifth Asikhulume Roundtable on children's rights. Over to you, Dr. Ntosana, as you wrap up. Is he there? I hope we haven't lost him. Earlier on, he actually made an indication that he was battling Dr. Ntosana. Okay, there he comes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam VP. I just have interesting connectivity, but thank you very much for a very exciting conversations. I think the attendees have really learned and get a better grasp of understanding issues as pertain to our children, either from the home and the school environment. And I think very interesting, it's also how the research has been done around this subject. But mine really is to let me first thank the attendees for being very patient and for listening attentive and for engaging with your questions on the chat. We really appreciate that, and this really facilitated the conversations. We also want to give thanks to our partner, the Third Trade Agency, for the technical support and through the planning that they've given to the team. I want to also thank our lovely speakers who kept us very informed and entertained, Professor Mccalla, and thank you very much. We really enjoyed the conversations, and we believe you are now part of the family as we come to the next Asikhulume conversations. I need to thank Tony Mccalla and Senshia Sonepul, who worked tirelessly to conceptualize and put the production of these conversations in place. They really worked very hard at the back, pulling us from one hand to the other. I want to thank you, colleagues, for the hard work that you're doing. Last but not least, to thank the host, Madam VP, for really spearheading this critical conversation and dialogue within the university. I mean, going back to when it started, these conversations are really growing, and they are touching on pertinent and cosmopolitan issues that are happening right now. Thank you very much. That's fine for today. I think I'll hand over to you, Madam VP and Senshia. But thank you for a very interesting conversation, colleagues. I thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that, Dr. Ntosana, for thanking everybody who's made that contribution. The fifth Asikhulume Roundtable discussion of 2020 on protecting children's rights and identities, opportunities and challenges for social cohesion. We have learned from our panelists in terms of how we could do things differently. We want to relay a word of gratitude and say that we now end this roundtable discussion and hope that you support our future roundtable discussions, because the whole idea is to grapple with all these issues that happen on the continent, in the world, as well as in particular on the vulnerable groups like children, for instance. At one point, we had thought we're going to be looking at the war in Ukraine, but thought we're not to vest with that, despite it affecting us in many ways than one. You have a good afternoon ahead. Goodbye.